Welcome to the Red Rose Film Club, a movie podcast that examines the wide world of cinema through a perpetually lefty, pinko commie, soy boy cuck, Antifa super soldier filter. But more specifically, we love movies and want to create a podcast that would appeal to the disparate tastes of our liberal, leftist, socialist, communist, Marxist, and Leninist friends. Red Rose Film Club is for leftists of all stripes who don't know what to talk about at parties other than movies and politics. My name is Craig. I work in public education and am passionate about social justice and workers' rights. But more importantly, it is my friend Hal's birthday this week, and I wanted to say happy birthday.
Thanks, Craig.
And I'm with
Hal. I'm Hal. I'm said Hal. My birthday's on the Ides of March 15th.
Ooh.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I knew that. You told me before, but I never put it together.
I think that maybe one of my more grandiose thoughts is that in some way that's like tied to my personal mythos. But in 2024, I'm switching it up and taking it back to the basics. I'm a socialist trying to grapple with our world by reflecting on it through art, theory, and the will of the people. So, Craig, what other pop culture are you getting into these days?
Well, in our last episode, we talked about how I had just watched Fitzcarraldo and loved it. So since then, I have watched Burden of Dreams, the documentary about the making of Fitzcarraldo, which shows that Fitzcarraldo is more of a non-fiction story than it is fiction, because Fitzcarraldo's journey is basically the exact same as Werner Herzog's journey, in that they both are going to pull this goddamn boat over this mountain. And it is like, I know, like, it's not breaking new ground to say Werner Herzog's a madman or whatever, but I guess I've never seen it distilled as clearly of like this man obsessed with an artistic vision as in this movie. It's crazy, the shit that they do, and how they like go about getting this thing up this fucking mountain. It's insane. And it's really interesting. Like, he says in the movie at one point that this might be one of the last movies shot with like actually indigenous people to the region that they're filming in, like, to this degree. And in Burden of Dreams, you see all the steps he takes to try his best and still frequently fail at not, I guess for lack of a better word, like polluting their culture while also trying to use them on the film. Like completely separate camps for the crew and the indigenous people, like basically trying to keep them as separate as possible, because he was very worried the entire time about their influence on the tribes, like customs and things like that, which was really interesting. And I didn't know much about beforehand.
Huh.
Yeah. But one of the funniest moments in the entire movie is like, there's a whole bunch of like Werner Herzog monologuing, because I mean that's what you come for,
right? If there's a documentary about him, that's
but
the
there's
main
two
stage.
monologues, one at the beginning and one at the end, of him talking about like the beauties and mystery of the jungles. And the one at the beginning is very like Herzogian about like it's a beautiful mystery, the place, it's full of enchantment and all this. And then the one at the end, my wife and I were watching together and just fucking rolling on the floor laughing at like his description by the end, after spending like months in the jungle, like just day after day of nothing happening because they're in a complete deadlock trying to figure out how to get this boat up the hill. And I'm not going to do the voice the whole time, but I did want to read this excerpt of him talking about the jungle in the last like 5 minutes of the movie. He says, Klaus Kinski always says the jungle is full of erotic elements. I don't see it so much erotic. I see it more full of obscenity. It's just nature here is vile and base. I wouldn't see anything erotical here. I would see fornication and asphyxiation and choking and fighting for survival and growing and just rotting away. Of course, there's a lot of misery, but it is the same misery that is all around us. The trees here are in misery and the birds are in misery. I don't think they sing. They just screech in pain. It's an unfinished country. It's still prehistoric. And while he's giving this monologue, his eyes, like, absent of that, like, Herzog curiosity, just dead, like, I'm so fucking over this. And it's just so funny, like, compared to the way he talks about it at the beginning.
There's definitely some projection there. There's also some like, everywhere humans go, we like seek to find ourselves reflected back. And he was feeling inhospitable.
And I didn't read the full monologue. He is also like self-aware of that. By the end, he's like, the jungle is beautiful. he still kind of goes back to it. He's like, it's just a different kind of beauty than or like whatever. He's just,
I'm not prepared to grapple with this beauty
so
anymore.
Fucking over it by the end of the movie. But yeah, so love that. Have you seen it before?
I have not. I knew it existed. I didn't realize prior to seeing your note here that it was directed by Les Blank, who directed one of my favorite. I was introduced to it by my friend Chantel, who often listens. Hi, Chantel. One of my favorite pieces of filmed media ever. Garlic is as good as 10 mothers.
And in the film, there's several shots of Herzog and several of his crew members wearing "Garlic is as good as 10 mothers" like crew shirts in the movie. Yeah, I remember seeing that and thinking specifically because we talked about it on the podcast before.
Yes.
Yeah. So the other thing I watched. And I'm going to keep watching, even though it's probably against my better judgment. But I was looking for a real lazy nonsense thing to not pay attention to the other night, and my wife and I put on the Halo TV series. Which, did you ever play the games?
I did not. I'm not a big video game person, but I think the funny thing about this show is that they talked about making it for like 20 years, and now it's out, and it was like an accident that I learned about it. Basically, we'll just like flipping through. So how is it?
It's like it's perfectly fine as like a bullshit thing to put on to pass some time. Like, and I like also. Speaking as someone who played the shit out of Halo 1 through 3, like I do still have that little like teenage thing, like, oh, that was the gun that I used. I like that part or whatever. But it's it's stupid in like slightly fun ways.
How is it mocap at all, or is it all?
No, they look like shit too. They look terrible. Like, okay, so there's like. I've only watched a couple episodes, but there's basically two kinds of aliens you see. There's the ones, if you're familiar with the game, the ones who like kind of rule are the like long-necked ones, and they look okay but shitty. Then there's the ones that like in the game Master Chief fights the most, that are like the grunts or whatever, and they look god-awful. It looks fucking terrible. It's really bad. Yeah, no. It is not good. I did find it interesting. There is like they lean really heavily into the kind of imperialism storyline of the shows, like or of the games, and that's kind of what the show seems to be about mostly. Is that like, you know, Master Chief works for the USNC or whatever the fuck, which is basically supposed to be like the United States on Earth, who are like colonizing smaller planets in the name of protecting them from the alien invasion, but the other planets don't want to be colonized. So there's like some interesting shit with that.
Okay, it's doing a lesser Starship Troopers moment.
yeah, kind of. And Master Chief takes his helmet off, which is never done in the games, and it's Pablo Schreiber, kind of a letdown.
Oh, I liked him.
No, I do too, but it is just really funny.
Interesting though.
There's just a really like dramatic scene of him taking the helmet off from behind, and then it reveals the face, and it's just
like,
Pablo Schreiber.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, well.
He has like an interesting career.
He does, yeah. I remember him as, well, I guess The Wire first.
Yes, season 2 of The Wire.
Ziggy? No, he plays Ziggy's fucked up friend. No, Ziggy's the fucked up friend.
He's the son. He's the main son in.
Okay, yeah. Of the
in the
dock
second
worker.
season, yes.
Yeah.
Of the second season of The Wire, and then he's in Orange Is the New Black. Like those are those are like the two roles I associate with him. It's just real up and down.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
Liev's brother.
Yes, the lesser.
Always strange. And then the last thing that I've been watching that I referenced before we started recording that I can't stop fucking watching, and it's the funniest shit, is it's a YouTube channel called Not Even a Show. I've vaguely referenced him before, but it's this comedian named Chris James who's on a podcast I like called Guys, where they just talk about different like subcultures of guys. Like there's episodes about CrossFit guys and beer guys.
I will say, after, I don't know that I ever told you this, but after you talked about that on an episode, you know, a couple weeks ago or whatever.
Yeah.
One of our friends, Joe, messaged me and was like, Craig is right. That's a very good podcast.
Oh, really? I was fully expecting it to go the other way, and you'd be like, they said that shit sucks.
So but there's validation floating out there. You know?
Thank you, Joe. But Chris has a YouTube channel called Not Even a Show, where like, okay, as a young teenager, I really liked like pranks. I thought they were hilarious. You know, I love Jackass, and then as you get older, you know, pranks are kind of the lowest common denominator on YouTube of like just running up to like strangers and bothering them. But I still do think pranks are funny when the target is like correct. And he has like an uncanny ability to get like famous right wingers' phone numbers, and also his ability to get past call screeners on like right wing radio and YouTube shows. So he just has recurring bits where he prank calls tons of like right wing ding dongs. Like my favorites are Sebastian Gorka, the like
you've talked about that.
He just calls in every time, and he's really good at like getting him on the hook, and then he'll just be like, and anyways, your head's just so fucking big I can't handle it. And then the other one is he prank calls Rudy Giuliani's weird call-in YouTube show and does the same thing where he'll get him on the hook for like 30 seconds and then just be like, well, anyways, I was just wondering what it was like when you fucked and married your cousin. And just gets them every time. But there's a few guys. The best ones are he's found these like right-wing ding-dongs who have YouTube shows with like 25 listeners that do like live call-ins. And one of them is a guy who's just clearly doing it in like his bedroom, which I mean, we're in my room, no shade or anything, but there's 2 doors behind him, like just a closet and another door. And he has been calling him for months going, open those fucking doors. What's behind those doors? God damn it. And the guy is like, if you watch him in order, the guy is increasingly having bigger and bigger meltdowns every time he calls about these doors. And it's so fucking good.
Do you remember when there was this kind of like sentiment online of like hashtag waste men's time?
Yeah.
Kind of this, let's say lightly feminist sentiment. It feels like the like
hell yeah.
Attacking conservative version of that kind of idea.
Yeah, it's really good. Oh, and then my favorite one, I didn't even mention, then I'll be done talking about this, but there's one, he just calls him the snake guy. It's another one of these like right wingers that does a YouTube show that nobody watches, but he has a Gadsden flag behind him. The coiled up, what does it say underneath? The fucking
join or die, or don't tread on me.
Don't tread on me. Yeah.
The opposite. It's the inversion.
Yeah. So he's done the same thing he does with the door guy, where he called him for months and months and months, and now you can watch like a supercut that's like 50 minutes long of all the times he's called him, where he'll get him on the hook like, I want to talk about this woke culture, and then but I remembered there's a fucking snake behind you, man. Watch out. And that's how it ends every time. And he has like a literal almost hour-long video of all the times he's called the snake guy, and the snake guy also has increasingly larger and larger meltdowns. It's just really good, and I love it.
He's engaged in YouTube terrorism.
Yes, yeah. It's like he's a white hat YouTube prankster. What about you? What have you been watching?
Well, this section is really going to be a little bit of a wild ride for me. So the first thing that I would say is I've talked about it multiple times, anticipating this movie, being really excited for it. But a couple of weeks ago, or since we last recorded, I watched The Sweet East.
Hell yeah.
Paid to rent it. It is available on VOD now. It is kind of a Alice in Wonderland rambling, also kind of a picaresque, to carry through a theme that I talked about on last episode as it relates to Barry Lyndon. But the movie starts out with the scene implying that Pizzagate is real. I love with that. Andy Milonakis.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Hell yeah. As a Pizzagator? As
the shooter.
Oh, as the like real guy. Or is this fictionalized?
It's fictionalized, okay. But they're basically our main character is on a school trip. It's a little unclear, but she's in high school, and they are at what was it? Pizza Bing Bong? What the fuck was the name of that place?
Ping Pong.
Comet Ping Pong. I was close. My brain's free associating. I remembered half of it. And Andy Milonakis comes in and shoots it up. People die. But then the ending of the scene is that they escape through a tunnel, and there's like children's things in it. So it's clear, right? The implications that Pizzagate is real. And the movie never lets up from there. It just gets like increasingly insane.
That's dope. I like that.
It is... I think like the thing about it that makes it worthwhile is it very much is like kind of irony pilled, drawing on these threads of like parapolitical schizopolitic bullshit. but it's beautifully made.
Uh-huh.
And that means that it never tips over into being like so aware of itself that it begins to fail as like a piece of art. I think it's worth watching.
Hell yeah.
I would encourage folks to watch it if you're down for a wild ride.
Hell yeah. And I'm looking at the guy who directed it, Sean Price Williams.
Yeah.
Who worked on a film that might come up later, and I didn't know that until just now, but he was the cinematographer on Good Time.
Yes, yeah, he is predominantly a cinematographer, and this is his first feature.
Oh, awesome.
And the movie is beautiful. Like, honestly, in some ways kind of similar to what we see in Earth Mama, the movie we're going to cover, where it has that really, like, kind of soft, gauzy feel to it. Like, his... lighting approach is beautiful. So I definitely recommend it. Then the other movie I want to mention is a movie I do not recommend at all.
Oh, no.
And I would say is the most disturbing movie I've ever watched ever.
Well, now you've got me interested.
So I've been on a journey of Severin Films released a box set of the Black Emmanuel series. So it starts with the original Black Emmanuel as Black Emmanuel 2, Emmanuel in America, Emmanuel in Bangkok, et cetera, et cetera.
Uh-huh.
So I've been slowly working through that at our dear friend and compatriots location, Cap City Video Lounge.
Hell yeah.
So on Saturday night, went to watch The Next.
Oh, he was showing them?
Yes.
Oh.
And I've seen several of them. I haven't seen all of them because usually he plays them as a double feature, and I can't watch a movie that starts at 10 p.m. or I'll fall asleep most of the time unless I'm like really planning for it and gearing up with some coffee. But on Saturday he started at 10 p.m. So we went and watched a movie that on the slipcase is referred to as Emmanuel Around the World.
Okay.
But I learned when I went to log it into Letterboxd that it's also sometimes called Emmanuel, Why Violence Against Women?
Damn. That sounds rough.
I'll just say, like, I will go into a little bit of what made it so rough, but we had a friend named Zoe surprise us for my birthday celebration this weekend. And I was like, well, I have plans to go see this movie. If you want to come. The other ones are like sexploitation flicks. Now, of course, there's like parts of them that have kind of what I will call a 70s definition of consent. But on the whole, they're fun. They're schlocky. People are like, it's softcore. Like, there's no penetration happening. There's a lot of boobs, but it's like people rubbing each other's bellies and like they barely kiss. Like it's the kind of like you Mystery Science Theater, right? We're sitting there like yelling at the screen while it's happening. She's like, oh, sure. Everything that I said turned out to be an accidental lie.
Damn.
There is full penetration in this movie. There is bestiality. More than one animal in the same scene. There are multiple scenes of gang sexual battery. It was like there's a snake that enters into a vagina is like happening on screen. I was yelling, like hollering at the screen. I have never experienced this before. So the friend afterwards was like, where does that rank? From like 0 to 10 for you? I'm like, it's absolutely a 10. Okay. Solo is like a 7 relative to what was happening in this movie.
All right.
Yeah, it's there's these I need some emotional distance from it to be able to say exactly what I want about it, but there's a very interesting thing happening in it where usually the plot of the Emmanuel films is she is a photojournalist. So what she does is she's traveling around the world and just fucking people while like taking photos of like native tribes and archaeological digs and art and animals and stuff like that. And in this one, she joins up with another woman, like journalist, just straight up like written journalist, to uncover a network of sex traffickers.
Okay. It's kind of like this. Kind of ties in with the Sweet East.
Right. That's what
Emmanuel does Pizzagate.
I keep like watching movies that have some odd resonance with each other. And there's like really interesting like parapolitical nightmare fuel happening where there's like senators and like a sheik and like all the power elite are wrapped up in this, you know, clandestine network. And it just is like not a fun sexploitation film. Yeah. It's this very odd, much darker enterprise. It's directed by Joe D'Amato, who is...
that name sounds familiar.
Yeah, he's a big Italian exploitation guy. The thing that so threw me off is that he directed the last one I watched, which was Emmanuel in Bangkok, which had like a scene that was pretty questionable in terms of consent. But the rest of the movie was just the same thing as the others have been. Again, mostly fun, lots of like silly metaphor, like a train driving into a tunnel, you know, intercut with people kissing, like that kind of schlocky, fun, silly bullshit. And so I was like, this one's going to be fun too. And it was like, no, he was gearing the fuck up to blow my mind. Not in a positive way.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And I'm never going to be allowed to choose a movie ever again for all of the people that were present, I think.
So is it indicative of the Emmanuel movies just turned up to another level? Like, because I've never seen any of them and would like to, but I don't know if this is a...
I would say watch Black Emmanuel and do not watch any others.
Okay.
It would be my recommendation if you're not looking for the most outer boundaries of good taste. Like, good taste is in the rearview mirror several miles back. And there's a lot of that I have a threshold for. But, like, actual snake touching a vagina, I was like... No, that's actually my line. It turns out
we found it.
Like, there it is. I will say something that is kind of interesting about it, is that this box set from Severin was produced by programmer, writer, director, Kirla Janice, who is the woman that wrote House of Psychotic Women.
Okay.
Which is a classic semi-autobiographical film criticism text about horror, gender, violence against women, trauma. Great book. And I have a box set of movies also from Severin by House of Psychotic Women, but she's been working for them for a while now. So it's interesting to situate these movies like in the context of her greater oeuvre. But yeah, don't fucking watch this movie. And had I looked it up and seen that the subtitle in English sometimes is Why Violence Against Women, I would have not invited a group of like 7 people to go watch this movie with me.
No, let's party and go watch this bestiality movie.
Damn. Yeah, I was really surprised Kevin didn't come. Like, I was like shouting at the screen.
And he did come in and he did not come in.
He did message me afterwards and say, sorry, I haven't seen this one yet. Is everyone okay? Are they scarred? I'm like, I do think I was kind of walked over to the bar to have a drink afterwards, and I was like quoting the song from Wicked at the end of Wicked. I don't know if you are familiar with the musical.
I saw it on a little street called Broadway.
Oh, nice.
Not bragging.
Just a little street.
The only one I've seen on Broadway.
But you know, that end song is like, who can say if I've been changed for the better? But because I knew you, I've been changed for good. That is how I felt. But, you know, changed forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I like fucked up movies, but I don't like that.
It was beyond
level.
The pale.
Yeah.
Like, I think if there was no bestiality, or the bestiality at least appeared to be
not real,
like
at least more of a barrier between person and animal. Yeah.
It would like there is some like really still silly, fun, over the top stuff in it. Like there's a scene where there's like a harem of women who are being trained in the Kama Sutra, and there's these giant wooden phalluses that they're all like rubbing on, but they're not actually touching them, so they're just like kind of dancing around them, and it's like fun. This is what this series of movies has been, and like the average person is probably going to be offended by that, but that is within the range of my sensibilities. Snake and pussy is not, you know.
Heard it here first.
Like, take that as you will. Yeah, wild experience. Still processing it, obviously.
Okay, well, because it is Hal's birthday this week, and when it was my birthday, we talked about some of my faves. So since it's Hal's birthday, let's talk about some of Hal's faves. And Hal, who are your top 5 favorite directors?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to do a, like, you know, they do an All Things Considered, like, this on NPR.
Is all directors considered?
Yes.
You watch Parks and Rec?
Yes.
Yeah, my like favorite running gag is who the fuck is it that does the voice? But the guy that does the fake NPR show.
Yeah.
Where he's like just constantly saying the dumbest shit, but with that like faux smart NPR voice, which I really like. Sorry.
Well, that is definitely what's going to happen here. Yeah. You know, and where they say like, this is true as of 12:17 p.m. on Tuesday, March 11th, 2024. A ranking of my top 5 favorite directors, and then some other contenders that I wanted to mention as well. For number 5, I'm going to go in the spirit of just talking about Salo. And also, I turned 33 on Friday. 33 is, some people call it your Jesus year, because that's how old
you're going to beat him.
Jesus was. I definitely am going to outlive Jesus. Barring, I guess, the next 4 days, right? And so I'm going to say Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Sorry, I was trying to do a gag and I thought I muted it. Well, I was trying to do the All Things Considered music. Is it boo, 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 boo? And I thought I had muted it and was ready to press it, and then I fucked it up.
You know, it's what Pasolini deserves, is to be played in at all times. Obviously, like, I think people outside of like the most in-depth cinephiles know him most for Salo, but I just love that he's a queer Catholic Marxist who uses religion and classic Western texts, not just Western texts, but you know, like Arabian Nights also, to grapple with like these really fundamentally human questions. I love the movie Theorem. It's one of my faves of all time, and I'm a huge fan of the trilogy of life. Then for number 4, we're gonna bring in Mr. Spike Lee. Yay! We've talked about him a lot on the pod, so I will avoid further explanation there. For number 3, I'm gonna say Peter Greenaway. You know, probably again best known for The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, Her Lover.
I've seen.
Wow. Damn, look, I killed that. I killed that in one take. But I'm like a huge fan of The Baby of Macon, which is, speaking of rough shit, pretty hard to watch. Oh God.
Cough button. We don't have one. I'm just going to say it.
I sucked phlegm directly into my throat. We're having a very pollinated spring here in Tallahassee, okay? I'm also, I love, you know, Is That Into Knots? Pillow Book is like not the Pillow Book. It's not my favoriteest movie ever in it, but the imagery in it is absolutely beautiful. I love highly formal, highly structured, big production value, massive production design, and the man delivers. Drossman's Contract, also another favorite. Number 2, my boy, David Cronenberg.
Damn.
Love that motherfucker.
Call him the Crohn's disease. That was too dumb. The
way he's running with. Nope, I can't finish the pun. I tried. I tried and failed, but it's okay. You know who doesn't fail? David Cronenberg.
Hell yeah.
He's constantly delivering. I started to write a list of my favorite Cronenberg, and it's just it's feckless. Like, there's no point, because it's like it's not all of them. Like, there are movies of his that I like more or less, but it just gets nonsense. Like, I'm like, Dead Ringers and Videodrome and The Brood and, like, you know, I love Existence. Like, they are all special to me in their own ways. They're sick, dirty, bloody, nasty, visceral little children.
And I will say, the movie we're going to talk about today, Earth Mama, had shades of Cronenberg.
Yes,
that really grossed me out.
Yes, when the body horror popped up, I was like, okay. Oh, and then my current favorite director, very recently toppling David Cronenberg, I would say, and Women in Love is really what did it for me, really cinched it in. And I actually rewatched Altered States this weekend, like in the last 24 hours. And that is Sir, even I think he might be knighted. Ken Russell.
I didn't even know he was British.
Yes. Oh, yes. In fact, my list has a lot of British men. Like, I'll say, like, Ken Russell is British. I mean, David Cronenberg is Canadian, so, you know, in the Commonwealth. Peter Greenaway is British. And then some of my other contenders, people that, like, don't quite hit that top 5, but I really love, would be, like, Celine Sciamma, Zulawski, whose first name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce right now. Peter Strickland, also a British man. Luca Guadagnino. Can't wait to see Challengers. Like, every time I watch a fucking trailer, it's a tennis pansexual frenzy movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Isn't it? Zendaya, and then two men that are attractive and have been in things. But
yeah, let's see. We got old Mike Faced.
Yes, and Josh O'Connor. Yes.
Not a great name for that first guy, but that's all right. We'll have to change that when we hit it big in Hollywood.
Well, this is his chance. It looks like they all smashed it out of the park, and I cannot wait to see it. John Carpenter, of course. And then I feel like I have to do my kind of like film bro of like, I love Scorsese. I love PTA. I do like Tarantino flicks a lot. And then Milos Forman, one of the first directors kind of along with Scorsese and QT that made me realize like I loved movies. Yeah. And then Agnes Varda.
Hell yeah.
So how much do our general lists overlap, Craig? Are there directors I named that you're less familiar with or that you'd, want to learn more about?
Definitely. First off, I love Spike and Cronenberg as well. I've seen most of their shit. Well, I've definitely seen, I believe, all of Cronenberg's.
They're both very prolific.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I look and I'm like, oh, damn, there's still like those 3 other things I haven't caught,
There's some early like 2000 stuff of Spike's that I haven't seen. I never saw She Hate Me. Was that what it's called?
Yeah.
She Hate Me? Yeah. Or the one about the phone line. Was that the same one? The phone sex line?
I don't even know what you mean.
Yeah.
So.
Damn, I can't remember what it is. But I love those guys. For the other ones, Pasolini and Greenaway, I've only seen one of their movies each. I've seen The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. Bam, 2 for 2. Both of us knocked it out.
Crushed it.
I've seen 120 Days of Sodom. And then Ken Russell, I've seen none of. However, last night, I finally subscribed to the Criterion channel.
Yes!
And saw The Devils on there and was like,
yes!
Oh, shit, I'm gonna
watch it!
And I went to click on it.
I can't believe I didn't even mention that. That's like my favorite movie, and I didn't mention it here.
I went to click on it and then looked at my watch and then felt that I was tired and was like, wow, this is not a good time. So
yes,
nearly watched it last night, but did not.
Whoo, man. Please text me when you watch it because I want to hear before the next record.
I'm watching it this week. I put a bunch of shit on that Criterion channel that I want to watch. So
it is, I wonder what iteration, because it's one of those movies that there are a lot of cuts of.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure, like, obviously it's Criterion Collection. I just mean, right. I will be curious to hear your recounting of it. Yeah, Greenaway, I feel like, is one of the tougher ones because his movies are so formalistic that there is very little like emotional connection to them.
Sure, yeah.
So you really, it's like you're watching a painting in a lot of ways.
And the Cook, the Thief, Bada, didn't get it that time, but that one is very much like that.
You just start scatting.
Cook and Thief and Wife and Lover.
Scatting because he makes that kid eat shit at the beginning of the movie.
Damn. I need to rewatch that because I did not pull that immediately.
I got that pun. There we go.
Hell yeah.
All right. Now, instead of talking about some political current events, this can be pretty heavy on the movie side, at least the lead in, because 2 days ago was the Oscars.
Hollywood's big night.
Yeah.
I did not watch.
I think it was like an interesting ceremony because so many of the movies had more cultural prominence than they often do. You know, like a lot of, like, some of the biggest, most winningest pictures had big box offices, which is not always the case. So I think there was like a little more buy-in. Like, a lot of the people at the Oscar party I threw were like, I've seen a lot of these movies, which is not necessarily the case. They also, Kimmel, they did a very good job of paring back. There was very little interstitial of Kimmel. It's like he did the opening monologue and they had a few bits, but the bits were really integrated
with
into like leading into the category presentation. So it felt pretty trim.
That's good, because that shit is terrible. Like, that's partly the reason that like I stopped watching so much, is because the like circle jerkery of it all, of like, especially with the host like continuously dredging up unfunny bits. And I'm thinking of Kimmel too, like oh god, what was that insufferable thing where he brought people into like a different theater a few years ago? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And they kept going back to it. Like, that shit. There was some shit about a mystery briefcase or something. God, it was just so annoying. But I did see some of the like clips and stuff, like the John Cena thing, which was
the John Cena thing
funny.
was pretty funny.
Yeah.
And honestly, based on one, watching it live, and then pictures of like the cup that he was wearing, he truly was like basically butt ass naked on that stage, which is in Birkenstocks.
Wiener balls and crack covered with like a single C-shaped piece of cloth.
It was bold, you know.
It was cool. I liked it. It was dope.
It was funny. Yeah. So I thought the ceremony as a whole was one of the more enjoyable ones that I've watched. Yeah, and I thought that his open monologue was funny enough, right? There are funny moments. My complaint always with award shows, and especially seems to be dominant among movie-oriented shows, is like, why does the host hate movies?
Oh yeah, the whole thing of like, this fucking thing came out this year. What the fuck was that about?
Can you believe that I'm up here? All this shit sucks. And it's like, the people who are watching this love movies. Why the fuck would we be watching it if we didn't love movies? And I felt like that kind of like tinged with bitterness is still present, but it did feel like it was reeled back a little.
Maybe that's why
I appreciated that
Billy Crystal hosting so much, because
he was earnest. If nothing, if not earnest,
he was earnest. Also, a lot of blackface when he did it, so maybe that's why boomers liked it too.
Yeah.
Wait, did he ever do? Because he did Sammy Davis Jr. impression in blackface all the time. Did he ever do that on the Oscars in blackface?
I feel like he did.
I feel like he did.
Probably because Billy Crystal's whole thing was like doing like skits where he is inserted into film. So like, it's very, very possible.
Well, you saw more of the movies this year than I did at the Oscars. How was your rate of predictions?
Extremely high.
Yeah.
I would say the only two that I did not just fully anticipate were Cord Jefferson's win for script, best adapted screenplay for American Fiction.
American Fiction, okay.
And then the Zone of Interest
for best international.
For sound.
For sound.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen it yet, but I know I'm aware of.
Yeah, the sound is extremely powerful. It's not as if, and when I say surprised, like, here's the thing, and probably many of the people who are listening to this know this, but in the event that you don't, the Oscars are not like sports betting,
Right.
Where sports betting, if we set aside any, let's say, conspiratorial thinking about fixing, right? But when you bet on a sports game, it's like who is the best in combination with the weather and the various players and who's injured and their attitude, blah, 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 of like who's going to accomplish this feat best. That's not what's happening with the Oscars. The Oscars are voted on by a constrained body of people who are secret but broadly known in terms of like how you get in.
Yeah.
And they have a long established trajectory and patterns that can be followed.
And plus marketing and PR campaigning.
Right. All of
like
that matters. And it matters in very specific ways. So if you follow industry media and the event for years, it is relatively easy to figure out what direction things are headed, if not with 100% success rate,
right.
You know? So for example, I think I'm like skipping ahead a little, but for example, I said, and many people who were present can testify to this, I was like, Emma Stone is absolutely winning this.
Okay, that was going to be my question, because as I don't follow the like Oscar media that much and like the predictions as much as I used to, and everything I saw, I felt like everyone was saying Lily Gladstone is kind of the lock for that. So I was going to ask you.
Yeah, and the betting markets, because Mike was like, we should have put money on it because you were insisting this, and the betting markets were strongly in favor of Lily Gladstone. So here's what I'll say up front, and this part of why I go into the like you can follow predictions is I am not saying Emma Stone deserved to win over Lily Gladstone.
Yeah, just
I am saying that based on what I see, I could forecast that it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
The reason why, or the reasons why, one, Emma was winning a lot of awards. They were kind of both up in the air. They both had a track record established during the rest of award season, but Emma had won some more recently. So that's kind of point one. Point two, there had been some conversations in industry media several months ago about how the length of Killers of the Flower Moon was acting against it because people didn't want to go to screenings.
Okay. So
there's that. There's
crazy.
Also the fact that Emma Stone's performance is a highly technical performance. She, if you have not seen Poor Things, recreates like the stages of childhood development through her physical performance. It's a very showy performance. And so that's like kind of point three. And then point four is she is the whole movie. She is doing that for the entire runtime. And, Lily Gladstone is in a much smaller percentage of a very long movie.
That was going to be my summation of why maybe she did. Well, also, let's not downplay the racism of it all.
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah.
But also, I feel like the Academy also has a history of not wanting to recognize lead performances that aren't the protagonist of the movie itself, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think the way that combines with racism, because it's like there are certainly instances where they have rewarded much shorter in terms of occupying time, running time,
but usually in supporting, I feel like
whereas
she was lead, and I feel like there's oftentimes that an argument between what makes a lead versus supporting, and I feel like a lot of dum-dums at the Academy might consider Lily Gladstone's performance a supporting performance because she is not like the protagonist of the movie, but no, it's definitely a lead performance. But
it's
I feel
for
like
sure
that might be another reason that she got discounted.
Yeah, it is for sure a lead performance. I just think it's like all of those things in combination.
Yeah.
Also, there is a little bit of a trend in acting performance categories at the Oscars where if you have won relatively recently, like it makes you more likely to subsequently win it. Like your your Oscar ordained talent is considered like self-evident, and it
being
kind
young, like they want. I feel like the Academy wants to be the like kingmakers of like. We gave Emma Stone the 2 Academy Awards early
2 in 5 years or whatever.
In her career or whatever. Yeah.
So I just think there's like a variety of factors that made me feel pretty sure that Lily Gladstone was not going to win, even though I think, frankly, they're both stunning performances. And I hope that, my understanding is that Lily Gladstone has several like contracts and roles lined up, and I hope to continue to see them.
Yeah.
And I've talked about before, there's some great independent films that they've been in previously. One that I saw at the Tallahassee Film Festival last fall. So I think that we have to stop acting like the Oscars is the
end all be all.
That's
kind of honestly why I stopped watching them so much, because I feel like my own brain, I poisoned it so much with like getting too emotionally invested in the winners of the Oscars to like, and it would make me like grumpy about movies. I don't know. So I think that's part of the reason I stopped watching it, because I was getting too in, like, knowing that it's not the end all be all, but still in my mind considering it as such and getting too like irritated with it and
wrapped up in
shit
it.
Like that. Yeah.
Well, that's why I kind of conceive of it as like a game, right? Of trying to like not who do I want to see rewarded, but like, can I tap into and predict what's going on. I will also say, as it relates to Cord Jefferson winning for Best Adapted Screenplay, during his speech, he said something that I absolutely loved and want to echo and reinforce, which is that like Hollywood needs to stop, like, basically he levied a critique and said that Hollywood does not view making a $200 million budget movie as large of a risk as making $10-20 million movies, and talks about the risk for these smaller films, but never does the same for these huge tentpoles that subsequently fail and increasingly are failing in the last couple of years. And talking about like, that's how you have to build up filmmakers, is by taking smaller risks and having mid-budget films again. And I was like, yes, yes, gang, preach. I liked that a lot. I did feel like on the whole, speech giving was really solid. Like there was a good combination of people, you know, I'm going to say have their axe to grind, but I mean it in a positive way. People kept it pretty tight. There were some charming speeches, and when Jonathan Glazer won for the best international feature, he talked about Palestine.
Oh, nice.
And was the only person to be explicit. So there were people wearing the red ceasefire pins that folks have been wearing throughout award season. There were also people wearing straight up Palestinian flag pins, including the cast or much of the cast of Anatomy of a Fall, which I loved. But he really spoke about, maybe it wasn't for that. Why am I forgetting? Well, it's because I was drinking wine. Did Anatomy of a Fall win?
It won screenplay.
Yes, that's it. I was like, now I'm second guessing myself because Justine Trier was like giving a speech. No,
he definitely won for
yes, sorry, yeah. I'm a little hungover from a separate incident. But okay, anyway, so there were people with ceasefire pins, there were people with the Palestinian pins, and then he explicitly referenced it during his speech and made an explicit connection between what's being depicted on screen in the zone of interest and the current violence and domination that's being enacted in Israel and against Palestinian people. And I thought that was really powerful, and that there's nothing to lose for him. I mean, he is an established career, sure. But he's not a big...
Right, not a tentpole director or anything like that. Yeah.
So I thought that was really, really powerful.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to watch this speech. I would love to see that. The other thing I want to talk about is first-time winners, that I feel like a lot of times the Academy has a history of like giving awards to people who have been in the biz a while and been nominated a bunch and never won, and giving them an award for maybe lesser performances or lesser films. But I feel two of the big first-time winners, I feel like, well, they're both from Oppenheimer, but I feel like these were not that. These were like solid, good choices. I'm excited that they won for Oppenheimer, which is Christopher Nolan for director and Robert Downey Jr. for actor. How did you feel about that? Do you like both of those wins? Do you feel like they're making up for not having been awarded before?
I mean, I do think they're both cumulative, but that doesn't mean that they're not also reward. I think the balance is more even than, maybe. And I love The Departed, right? But like Scorsese winning for The Departed is like obviously a career retrospective. But I do feel like it's more evenly balanced. I thought there was no universe in which Nolan in particular was not going to win. Again, it was he just checks so many boxes. Like, he is a guy that straddles the line between huge, movies that just come and rock face in terms of box office and viewership, but they're also artful. He cares a lot about tech. Like, he's very techy, right? He has, here's where you should sit in my theater, and I filmed this in a very specific way, so it should be shown on IMAX. And, folks in the Academy like that. Like, it appeals to folks on the technical side, technical categories too. And it's a feat. It's weighty. The movie is about something very serious, which Oscar, tends to be kind of Oscar baity.
Ned Beatty's brother. Sorry.
But I do think it was deserved. I'm fine with the Robert Downey Jr. of it all.
Who'd you want to win?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I'm not like, he took that and he shouldn't have, or he stole that from underneath someone's nose. But it's just not. It does that one feels a little more towards the like
cumulative
and specifically like acknowledging his trajectory, right? Like, was in some good films when he was younger, including like independent stuff, and then fell off, and then came back and is part of the rise of Marvel, which is like a very specific interesting space in cinematic history, and then is now doing like tour de force performances. Like, it does feel a little rewarding. I was
listening to the Chapo Trap House episode where Will Menaker was talking about the movies, and they said that this is his penance for signing a 20-year deal with Disney to give his life over to him. They're at the end of that, you get an Oscar. I was surprised though, because I looked it up and I thought he had been nominated more times than he had. He's only been nominated twice before, and they're both very interesting. One I think you probably would get immediately, and then the other one I couldn't believe and then remembered, he was nominated for that. Do you know what the first one was early in the career?
Was it Less Than Zero?
No, it was Chaplin.
Oh, duh. Yes.
And then his only other one before Oppenheimer was for Tropic Thunder.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Bold, I will say.
Yeah, honestly. And then, but the movies, and I don't even like Robert Downey Jr. that much. He actually kind of annoys me to a great degree. I do like him as an actor, though, in certain things, but his two performances that are my favorite are in Zodiac and Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Are like two faves of mine.
He's great in those. And I do like him in his younger days. A lot. I mean, I've said Less Than Zero because I fucking love Less Than Zero. But yeah, the Chaplin is not surprising.
Yeah.
I think he wins here because of narrative, and then I think also the category is like kind of crowded and also has several comedic performances in it, which is I think there's just like no other clear runner.
Maybe De Niro.
Again,
so
I think it's
he's won it a bunch of times.
And I also just think it suffers from, again,
people not seeing it.
Like, our people not seeing it. And I hope we see Sterling K. Brown in this role again. Or not in this role, but like nominated again.
Oh yeah.
And then, speaking of one of the nominees in this category, Ryan Gosling.
Oh, that was great.
The I'm Just Ken performance was fucking great.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It really lived up to my expectations. I'm glad they went like Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend.
Yeah.
The fact that they had the other Kens there dancing like really blew me away. I was like, cool.
Yeah. I wish they would have put Slash in pink. That would have been
or like his hat in pink, something
and
like
his sewn in hair in pink. That would have been great. Do you know that supposedly
Yeah, I
He has
mean,
his hair sewn into that hat.
it makes sense. It's like Brett Michaels from Poison. It's definitely in the bandana.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Rock of Love?
Did I ever watch Rock of Love? Absolutely. I do a near annual rewatch of it.
I love how there would be scenes where girls would come knock on his door at 3 a.m. and he would answer with bandana, cowboy hat, on with his PJs.
Those shows are unhinged and unparalleled. We can never go back. No. But
both ironic and not at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's much more genuine than it should be, to be honest. But I was very delighted by that. And I would just like to propose, I'd like to put this out here in the universe. I need Ryan Gosling, and I know we're going to be like, oh, La La Land. Sure. I need him in a full musical.
Musical, yeah.
A full, genuine, mid-20th century, big-ass movie musical.
That would be great, yeah.
He's so delightful. He's so charming. He has great comedic timing. Let's lean into that. He's done his dark, the Nicholas...
Sparks?
No,
I know. I can't...
What's that guy's name?
Griffin.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. And he's done the Only God Knows, or whatever. Let's continue down this trend down this path for a little while.
Hell yeah. Well, we are going to talk about the movie Earth Mama today, which is a recent A24 release. And since A24 has been around for about a decade now and is consistently releasing some really good flicks, we want to kind of run down maybe some of our favorite A24 releases. Do we want to go 3, 2, 1 or 1, 2, 3?
Let's do 3, 2, 1, but we can each start out with our honorable mentions since we have a few.
Okay, cool.
Listed there.
Mine, there are too many to pick from. I had a hard time with this.
They're so prolific.
Yeah. So I saw some of yours and then wanted to go different. Yeah, so I didn't go with a true 1, 2, 3 because I wanted to first not duplicate any that you may have picked because there's a few on yours that would have appeared on mine. And then also I know there's several that I have talked about a lot on the podcast that I didn't necessarily want to put up there again. So my honorable mentions would be the Ari Aster collection of Hereditary, Midsummer, and the further I get away from it, the more I love it. Beau is Afraid. I also like some of their weirder genre fare, like Spring Breakers and Green Room, would be some of my honorable mentions. What about you?
Yeah, mine would be, I'll also say Spring Breakers.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with friend Laura, who's been on the podcast before, about how Spring Breakers and also the Beach Bum, which was, I don't think, a A24 release, but I'm just referring to Harmony Korine in general right now, captures this very the ways in which beach towns are liminal spaces that tourists just pass through like fucking ghosts, and for the people that live there it's a very odd experience. And as someone who grew up in Southwest Florida very close to the beach, I really like his work in that vein. Don't so much care for his other work, but Spring Breakers is up there. Then some others, A Most Violent Year, The Lighthouse, obviously I talked about that a lot last time. The Green Knight, fucking loved that. And then In Fabric, directed by one of the directors I mentioned earlier, Peter Strickland.
Oh yeah.
How about your number 3?
My number 3 is a movie that I referenced earlier, and the directors of which might come up again, but my number 3 is Good Time, the Safdie brothers movie with Robert Pattinson and Benny Safdie.
Yep.
Okay, who's also in Oppenheimer, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love this movie. It is, and
also in Licorice Pizza.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's definitely doing more acting in The Curse.
Oh, he's like the director of that show.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't watched that yet, but I want to.
No, he's in the show. He's the director.
As the director of the fake show in the show. Yeah. But I love Good Time, which is this odyssey of kind of how a white man kind of gets to I don't know, not explore, but escape the bounds of the criminal justice system. It's, he robs a bank with his brother who is mentally challenged, and it is his mentally challenged brother who's the one who gets arrested, and he comes up with this harebrained scheme that would never work to kind of bust him out of jail. And we see him just kind of, it takes place over one night, just drifting through different like vignettes and kind of like fucking up people's lives as he kind of goes on this one-man mission to save his brother. And it's, got that like typical Safdie like just fucking bad vibes throughout, but impossible not to watch.
Yeah, it's not a good time.
Yeah.
Also, I will say, I went to look up his last name because I could only remember Buddy, but one of the like dominant supporting roles, the actor Buddy Duress, who played Ray in Good Time, died very recently. And he was in some other Safdie movies, so I just wanted to,
I didn't know that,
memorialize him. They the Safdies do something interesting of, in addition to having obviously big stars like Robert Pattinson, Jennifer Jason Leigh, etc., pull in folks that are living the lives that are depicted in their movies. Which, and unfortunately sometimes that doesn't end in pleasant ways.
Similar to Earth Mama too, as I believe a lot of those were not like normal actors, like by
right.
day, even the main character, I believe. But what about you? What's your number 3 A24 film?
My number 3, definitely some recency bias here, but I'm gonna go ahead and say The Iron Claw.
Heck yeah.
Love wrestling. I love a movie that ponders masculinity and the consequences of violence for the loved ones of those who enact it, but also on their own psyches. A lot of great performances in it, and it just feels like a really perfect, kind of narrowly tailored story. Those are some of my favorite A24 films that really feel like that American independent film. Like they have the stamp of the markers of an American independent film, which frankly Earth Mama does too. How about your number 2?
My number 2 is Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin, which is a creepy fucking movie from beginning to end that I really love. But the parts that will always stay with me are the sex scenes, which are not really sex scenes, but like shot in a black void of like goopy black water as she's like trapping these men, and they're slowly just sinking into it, and they're just haunting and disturbing and fucking gross. And I love all of that. You seen Under the Skin?
I have, and Jonathan Glazer knows how to get under the skin.
Bing bong. He's only made 4 movies. I have not seen Birth. Have you seen Birth?
So I have not. I have only seen Under the Skin and The Zone of Interest. I have not seen Sexy Beast or Birth. But I did realize like a couple of days ago that I have a DVD of Birth.
Oh, really?
I have literally zero idea of where it came from. But it's been sitting on my coffee table like, okay, we need to dive into this. So I probably will watch it in the next couple of weeks.
I was exploring the Criterion Channel's like collections, and there's one that was like a collection called Interdimensional Love Stories, and Birth is in there. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, I love a Nicole Kidman moment.
Yeah.
So.
But you also got to see Sexy Beast because that's fucking great.
Okay.
Like a terrifying Ben Kingsley performance.
Oh, sick.
Yeah. What about you? What's your number 2?
Oh my God. And I'm about to say this. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't put this motherfucker on my director's list. Not that he would be top 5, but major oversight. I love Yorgos Lanthimos, and Yorgos has released several like this and Killing of a Sacred Deer through A24, but The Lobster. I love a dark romantic drama. I think it's incredibly moving and compelling to think about the ways in which people in love are bonded by their shared failings, and the decision or lack thereof that Colin Farrell makes to stab himself in the eyes, which we don't see the outcome of at the end of the film, is very moving to me. I think it's just like the kind of emo part of me. Like that's my like adult emo version, is I'm like, yes, I love this. And like Léa Seydoux is in it. I love that it's like twisty and fucked up, and the conceit is like silly, while also and funny while also being very perturbing.
Yeah.
John C. Reilly's performance in it is fucking great. I love chubby sad sack Colin Farrell. Like top to bottom, I love that movie.
Hell yeah.
What's your number one?
My number one is also one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years or so, which is Paul Schrader's First Reformed, starring Ethan Hawke. Just a movie about like grappling with the ideas of being complicit in like global tragedy, I guess, for lack of a better word. And it really, honestly, even before we decided we were going to talk about our top A24 movies, I have been thinking of this movie because we talked about it last episode, but the protest and death of Aaron Bushnell very much made me replay parts of First Reformed in my mind. Just the idea of, again, not knowing, being so far at the end of your rope, knowing that there's absolutely nothing you can do, but you're still complicit in the actions of it being done, and like how do you grapple with that, and you know, going to the extremes or whatever. But yeah, I love First Reformed.
I assumed this was gonna be your number one. My number one is Uncut Gems.
Hell yeah!
To bring it back
again,
to the Safdies
too. But I didn't want to dupe our lists.
Very,
but yeah,
very fair. It is. When it was in theaters in spring of 2020, I saw it twice in 1 week in theaters. I love a movie that takes you on an emotional journey. Like, there are some people who watch that movie and they're like, it made me feel so anxious. I hated that.
Oh, I saw it with my wife and my mom.
Loved it.
I saw it with my wife and my mom, and they were having a fucking panic attack in the theater, and I was just edge of my seat, smile on my face, just watching this bullshit. Well,
I think it's like, as someone that I've talked a little bit on the pod before, has a lot of mental health issues and does experience a lot of anxiety. I think there is like a thing for me about it that it feels like a safe way. It's, it's not dissimilar from liking horror movies.
Yeah.
It's a safe way. Like, I know that this movie is fake and that the movie will end.
Right.
And so being able to be on the ride and have that physiological experience and know that it will conclude, I think, is like my version of thrill seeking as someone who's pretty risk averse in general.
Yeah.
And just so many good performances in it. The music is stunning. I love that there's this like mythical quality. The opal itself, like the idea of using the opal injects this mythical quality that I feel like is missing from the rest of their work.
Right. Yeah.
That makes it the Safdies work, that makes it very special to me. Like, it takes, like, I don't know that they can ever beat this movie in terms of, and it's kind of my understanding, I don't know, I've read some stuff that it sounds like
they're breaking up.
They're not going to be directing things
Yeah.
together, and maybe that Benny Safdie is continuing to go more in the acting direction, but I don't know that they could beat this movie if they tried. I really think it is a perfect movie. Like, there's no part of it that I would change. It's sexy, it's freaky, it's upsetting, it builds suspense and holds you in a fucking vice grip. Love it.
And it's funny.
Yes.
Did you say funny? You might have said funny.
Yeah, maybe.
I love the scene where he gets kidnapped at his daughter's like dance recital or whatever. It's just like not funny. I mean, it's a really tense moment, but it's just a great sequence. Also, one of the like great performances by a non-actor in Kevin Garnett, who like I remember.
It's so much the movie rides on him being convincing.
Yeah, and he's really good. And also that it's oddly a period piece because it's set 10 years before it was actually made, when Kevin Garnett, I think is it the year that the Celtics win? I think it is the year the Celtics win the finals for the first time with Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce and all them.
That makes sense. I don't know. I think I can't remember if this was on Mike. I told you Mike and I have been getting into basketball.
Hell yeah.
So I don't have a lot of context for that, especially I have not watched it since we've started doing that.
Well, if I'm wrong, this is going to be completely doesn't make sense.
But no,
to the movie,
it creates, if it is true, it creates additional dramatic irony.
Yes, because that was the season that you know, the Celtics hadn't won in forever. They were like this mythical, like they were one of the first of the modern, like the concept of a big three. Do you know that in basketball talk? Yeah, like it was Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen as like the big three, the Celtics that were going to take them. They had this kind of magical year. It ended in a like kind of sweet but really corny thing where Kevin Garnett is holding the trophy and he looks into the camera and he screams, "Anything is possible." So like for it to be, if I am remembering correctly, for it to take place during that season also adds like a fun element to it.
And speaks to that kind of wonder and enchantment layer. Yeah, I love that. I hope that's true, honestly. And if I'm sure that it is by nature of what
not on pod. So if I'm wrong, then it'll just go unmentioned.
I know we've got some basketball fans that listen. They're yelling at us right now. But yeah, I fucking love that movie. Every once in a while I walk out of a theater and I go, hell yeah. Like I'm going to watch that movie for the rest of my fucking life. And it really delivers. That's awesome. For me.
Can I tell you a really sweet thing that was it this movie? Damn, now I can't remember. But it might have been Lady Bird. I think it was Lady Bird. Because they came out right around the same time, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And my wife and I did a double feature that day at the theater where we saw Uncut Gems and Lady Bird.
Woo!
I know. And it was one of those movies, but there was an elderly couple in the theater whose like grandchild or something had done some work on the movie.
Oh, wow.
And they like, first off, they were talking the entire movie, but not like in a way that would get you angry. Like they were like couldn't hear and were like talking.
What?
Like,
yeah. What did he say?
Yeah. So like it was very cute while they were talking the whole time, but at the end they were like, "Okay, here she comes. Here she comes. Here she comes." And then when they saw her name, it was very adorable.
That is really
it was
sweet.
Lady Bird, not Uncut Gems, but I can't quite remember. But
that is a wild ass double feature because it's like heartrending and you're like crying and then like you're stressed out.
Right,
like just. And I will say the last thing for this section. On Thursday, I have tickets to see this upcoming Thursday, the 14th. I have tickets to see Love Lies Bleeding, which I have been so fucking zooted to see. The second I saw a teaser trailer for it, I was like, this movie is made for me.
Oh yeah.
Fucking lesbians, bodybuilding, rose glass. I didn't list Saint Maud because it doesn't quite rise to the threshold, like doesn't quite break my like top, but her first feature, Rose Glass, the director, her first feature, Saint Maud, is an A24 release and is a great horror movie about a nun who is experiencing severe mental illness, or maybe God's talking to her. Who can say?
Hell yeah, banger of a cast.
It's
too.
Really good. Also, yeah. Kristen Stewart is in it. Fucking Ed Harris is in it. It's like a thriller. It's violent. Like the second I saw this, I was like, this movie feels like it was like plucked from the cinematic heavens and is for me specifically. So I have no doubt that it's gonna like crack this top 3, honestly, because the early reviews have been very positive. So
it also has, I'm noticing, because I was looking at it, a MMA fighter named Keith Jardine, who's a bit of a nut job in it. Ooh. And kind of has a very crazy look, just a bald head, a little goatee, just always looks kind of psychotic. So that seems like he's gonna fit right in. I am fucking obsessed, and I haven't even seen the goddamn movie yet. Like, this is the kind of movie that I feel like I may end up like going to see it again a bunch of times
this weekend. Like, if it's, you know, if it's up there. And the I just can't wait. It seems like there's like kind of like a gangster organized crime element with Ed Harris stuff. Like, it really just feels like it's going to be up there. So now we're going to go ahead and dive into the movie that we came here to discuss, which is, as Craig mentioned, an A24 release from 2023. It is called Earth Mama.
Not Mama Earth, which I had to say fix in my own notes a million times.
I will say before we lead into this, if you have Showtime or Paramount Plus with Showtime, you can watch this on streaming. Otherwise, it's available on VOD. I strongly encourage watching it. I really wanted our next pick. We have not watched or covered a movie. I mean, I've watched movies, but we have not covered on the podcast a movie that was directed by a Black woman. It's directed by a first-time featured director named Savanah Leaf. And I really wanted an opportunity also to talk a little bit about like child protective services and how the family court system negatively impacts Black women in America and families as a whole. And so this movie presented a good opportunity. And when it was kind of popping up during the Independent Spirit Awards, which I talked a little bit on the last pod, I was like, it's time. We got to do this. So for our lead-in, I want to talk a little bit about stereotypes around Black motherhood. So Pat Hill Collins, or Patricia Hill Collins, is a scholar, activist, icon, sometimes best known for her concept of the matrix of oppression, which is kind of another way of talking about intersectionality. She has a great book that she published in 2004 called Black Sexual Politics, African Americans, Gender, and the New Racism, where she writes about the archetype. She uses the phrase, she doesn't use the word archetype or stereotype. She calls them controlling images of the Black bad mother. As is often true with race in America, we can trace the potency of this image of the bad Black mother to chattel slavery. The objectification, dehumanization, commodification, and exploitation of Black people in America established and reinforced Blackness as a social, political, and economic status to forcibly inhabit, right? Chattel slavery integrated gender oppression such that the ways that Blackness functioned as a class relation differed for Black men and Black women. Black women's physical labor in whites' fields and homes was gobbled up and expropriated for their oppressors' gains, but so too were their reproductive capacities. Narratives, myths, and stereotypes about Black women's fertility as abundant justified reproductive politics of slavery. During the long, violent years in which slavery dominated, Black women giving birth was about generating additional sources of labor endogenously, right? Like slave owners who could reproduce the system internal to their own plantations. For an enslaved woman in the U.S., birth was about future profit and the literal continued reproduction of that system.
And as the political economy of the U.S. has shifted, the images used to reify the active system of domination have evolved too. The most useful ideological tool for justifying racial inequities now contends with the fact that post-chattel slavery and sharecropping, Black children are no longer as valuable to whites. No longer unpaid labor, Black children ostensibly have citizenship rights, and they are now calculated by the system to be expensive. The old images no longer pack the same punch, so they are refashioned and transformed. The bad mother rises
rises two shoulders.
Sorry.
This is what happens when I write scripts at 5 a.m.
Let me put, Damn, I read over this too. I thought I was going to catch anything.
Sorry. Yeah, no, that's... That was me.
The old images no longer pack the same punch, so they are refashioned and transformed. The bad mother rises to shoulder the ideological weight of the new paradigm. The image of the bad mother is of a woman abusive or neglectful, usually depicted in poverty and using drugs. She is figured as out of control, promiscuous, and an agent of her and others' destruction. To the white supremacist system, she represents a current and future threat. Her humanity is denied because under the current paradigm, to be moral and thus human is to be disciplined. Autonomy is curtailed, and Black women's bodies are sites for cruel and invasive state interventions. Pregnancy is another locus for criminalization.
We see her in Reagan's welfare queen boogeyman, intended to stoke racial resentment so she can be used as a wedge in electoral battles. It reflects and feeds into these now omnipresent forces of neoliberalism that on the pod we've returned to time and time again as we've sought to understand how power operates. Privatization, stripping of public benefits, austerity. As Pat Hill Collins says, this constellation of representations functions as ideology to justify the new social relations of hypoghettoization, unfinished desegregation, and efforts to shrink the social welfare state. As a quick sidebar, If you're interested in learning more, I really highly recommend Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, The Meaning of Liberty by Dorothy Roberts, Reproductive Justice by Loretta Ross and Ricky Solinger. Loretta Ross, one of the women that invented the term reproductive justice, and the collection Undivided Rights, Women of Color Organized for Reproductive Justice. In a future episode, I definitely want to do a write-up on the reproductive justice movement, like as a whole, like the actual social movement, so we can dig into collective resistance to these ideas and policies that we've kind of delineated here. But decided to focus on, in this instance, as it relates to Earth Mama, the materialist roots of the stereotypes that this movie engages. So for now, let's talk about Earth Mama and reflect on the ways that this film takes the bad mother image as its subject and approaches her with empathy. So Craig, what are your first impressions of this movie?
I really, really enjoyed this movie. It is beautiful. The performances are great, especially the lead actress, Tia Nomore. I'm not sure how to say her name, who this is her first and only movie credit, I believe, but she is like carrying the entire thing and does a fantastic job. What about you? What were your first impressions?
Yeah, I loved it. I agree. There's a lot of complexities in her performance. She is capturing really the tension between like the character's emotional state and the emotional journey and all of the pressures that she is having to navigate. Like I think that she really conveys that tension very well, of like how she wants to react, how she wants to say, how she wants to feel versus the ways that she knows that she must,
right, in
order to survive. I also think that it's beautiful. It's absolutely a gorgeous movie, and I love the magical realist elements of integrating nature. I know we'll talk about that probably a little more in depth in a minute, but I find it to be very powerful and naturalistically integrated. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And let's just kind of summarize the premise here in that Gia is the protagonist who has 2 children already, probably ages like 4 to 7-ish, who are both in custody of the state. A lot of her life
they're in foster care currently.
Yeah. And a lot of her life previous is not explicit in the movie. It's a lot of inferences to make or slowly revealed bits of information. But you see that she is an attentive mother to her children. She's got a busy life where she's working a job that she only gets 15 hours, which is not enough to make any kind of money. But we see her kind of doing the things that she needs to do as far as to get reunified with her children.
So she's taking parenting classes. She's taking emotional regulation classes. We hear some discussion, but we don't see, at least not for a long time, some discussion of substance abuse.
Yeah, we know she's a recovering addict because there is early on, I think there's
in one of
monologue.
the classes, they talk about it too.
Yeah, about the, it's a really beautiful monologue about the like anxiety of being the daughter of an addict and then repeating that cycle when you become a mother, and passing that anxiety on. So there are like clues earlier that she's a recovering addict, but she's also pregnant, very pregnant. First off, was the actress pregnant?
I don't know,
because if she wasn't, that was some
great,
solid,
beautiful makeup
work.
Yeah, beautiful makeup work.
Because there are some like close-up shots of her pregnant belly, and it looks real as hell. But yeah, it's this kind of, she's having to navigate this system to basically prove that she is a good mother, while the state is constantly reminding her that she either isn't, or that there are certain boxes that she has to fill to be considered a good mother, both from the state and from her friends, family, and things like that.
Yeah, and she's trying to, just kind of to synthesize or put a real fine point on it. Basically, she's trying to get back custody of her 2 children that are in foster care, while also there's a looming threat of the state intervening in the child that, her fetus that is not yet born. As well. So we kind of see her endeavoring to get back her kids while also not losing access to the one that's on the way.
Yeah, but let's go ahead and jump into like the visual storytelling here. because I feel like those scenes in nature are beautiful. There's very like warm light. You had a great term when you were talking about another movie earlier that I forgot, but you called it something about
it's like
that.
gauzy almost.
That gauzy
is that
light, yeah, that beautiful light. But I also think what works really well is the juxtaposition of the scenes where she is either being controlled by like an agent of the state or being pushed into doing something against her her own personal like code of ethics, like when we see her stealing the diapers, that those are a lot of those scenes are shot like almost like she is confined or in a prison. I first noticed it when she is stealing the diapers. She steals them from like a popular playground, and she's passing through, like there's a long tracking shot of her walking to steal the diapers because she can't afford them. And she passes a bunch of the playground equipment, but they kind of go past her like prison bars. And then there are a lot of shots with her on the other side of a piece of glass, in those conversations with Miss C, her caseworker. And then the really stark one is when she has to take the P test with Miss C standing there. The whole shot is just a static shot, but framed almost like a guard checking in on like a prisoner, which I thought was just a very good way of showing how her life is so controlled in those moments. And then juxtaposed with the elements in nature and the more like beautiful shots of her kind of unrestrained and like more at peace with herself and the world. Like the visual storytelling is great.
Right. And that nature represents like a freedom and liberty that isn't present in the rest of her circumscribed, dominated life. And again, it has like magical realist elements where she is sitting down and she's in a room, but she looks down and suddenly the ground is dirt, and then she looks up and she's in a redwood forest. We hear her son Trey make reference on the phone with her that he wants to go to the beach again with her, right? So there's just these it trickles in big booms, like these big magical realist moments where suddenly she's in the forest where obviously she's not actually, and it's escapist. But also we see she's watching a documentary about redwoods on the TV, and her son is referencing it. Like it is present and a source of like wishful escapism throughout the movie in a really beautiful way. Like I just kind of love that there's like drips and droplets of it throughout,
becoming more and more explicit as the movie goes on, those like nature elements and things like that. Also, I want to talk about some of the side characters who I think are really interesting, and I don't know if I've made a lot of connections with what I think they might represent in the bigger picture, but specifically Mel, who is her friend. Is it her friend or her sister? I couldn't quite.
So I think it's not her sister. Okay. Her sister she lives with, and her sister is a little unclear to me if she's drug dealing or if she's a sex worker. It was not clear exactly.
She says at one point, if they found out what my sister did to make money, they'd never let me see my kids.
Yes, and we hear the sister on her phone saying like, yeah, for 90 I got you. That couldn't, like, it's not totally clear, but she's definitely engaged in some kind of black market dealing that the state would not be happy about. Mel is a local butch lesbian
who's just back in town after like caring for her.
After being in prison. She talked about Sanjo, I assume.
But she talks about that she was gone for a while because she was caring for her mother who recently passed.
Yeah, I thought that when she talks about being in Sanjo, I thought she was talking about being in prison.
I just thought she meant San Jose.
Oh, okay.
Listener, figure this one out for us.
Multiple.
Come back.
But she is, how I interpret the character is she is a butch lesbian who is trying, like wants to be there for Gia and support her, and that Gia is conflicted on some level about like the degree of support that she wants to accept. And to me, how I read it is that some of that conflict is, it does seem like Mel has like interest in her beyond like being a good friend.
Yeah.
But Mel is the only person that consistently shows up for her, especially in the second half of the movie. And like when she's actually giving birth, like Mel is the only person that's not associated with the state that's there.
Yeah. Because the other friend that she has is a fascinating character, which is Trina.
So are you about to do this too? I did not until just double checking to see how to pronounce or what an actor's name was, that Doechii is who is playing Trina.
I did not know who that was, but I did
she's
also
a rapper.
see that she's a rapper. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
What would I know her from? Would I know her from anything?
She got big on TikTok.
Okay.
She's a very good rapper.
Okay. I see. I'm just looking up some. I see she did a song with Missy Elliott.
Yeah, I think
and Kodak Black.
I think she's worth listening
to.
Yeah,
I'm definitely gonna check her out.
The song that she got popular for on TikTok, probably, I don't know, I'm so bad at this, like 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, a year ago, somewhere in that range, to a year to 2 years ago, is called like Yucky Blucky Fruitcake.
Hell yeah.
And it's a good track, but she raps with like 4 or 5 different flows in it, and so it's very like, it's an impressive first single. Or maybe it wasn't her first single, but it was certainly the single that made her blow up on TikTok, and people would use clips of it as for their own videos and stuff.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to check her out.
She's worth listening to, but I didn't realize that was her until this. So
well, the character Trina is one of the more fascinating in this, and that she's kind of like presented at the beginning as Gia's best friend, who is also pregnant, seemingly about as pregnant as Gia is. So they're kind of going on a similar like pregnancy adventure at the same time together.
They also, Trina, it's like heavily implied to the point of nearly being explicit, but it's not outright said, but she's in these classes with with Gia, so it's clearly implied that she is not just on a pregnancy journey at the same time, but is undergoing a similar experience with recovery, the state, family unification, that kind of thing. The thing that's very interesting about Trina is that she becomes increasingly critical of Gia's approach to trying to grapple with her circumstances, and even goes so far, like does so from kind of a religious perspective, and begins to imbue Gina's choices with like Satan. calling her like the devil's tool or whatever she says to her the one time. So it gets the trajectory there, whereas Mel kind of increasingly steps up to be present for Gia, we see Trina move in the opposite direction.
It's like Mel and Trina are two sides of the like cultural stigma of like a woman choosing to do something other than have and raise the baby, I think, because partly what Trina really starts like going in on her is when Gia tells her that she's thinking of giving the baby up for adoption, and Trina sees that as like the devil's work or whatever.
And Trina does say she's a very interesting character, because she, while providing support to Gia, and kind of they're providing each other mutual support as they prepare to go to one of these classes. They're like sitting in a car talking, or they just got out of one of these classes that they're forced to go to by the state. Trina says something like, we are fighting a fight that our mothers fought, that our grandmothers fought, that our great grandmothers fought, and really sees that historical legacy of racism and state domination, and says like, we have to keep fighting this fight together. So she is one of the few people in the movie that explicitly names what's happening,
right?
And then the way that commingles with her religious views is really interesting, I think.
Also, the movie implies that she choked her basketball coach as a budding NBA fan. when they're talking about how they both played basketball in high school.
Yes.
Gia says that Trina was good until she went all Spreewell. Do you know? Do you know?
Oh, because I was like, "What are you talking about?" But no, I did not. I didn't search
Sprewell
that.
was a notorious crazy basketball guy who would get in fights all the time. But one of his biggest, most infamous moments was he at practice put both hands around and throttled his coach almost to the point of him passing out. So there's a very quick reference that
does
Trina
provide,
may have choked out their high school basketball coach.
That does provide some context. Yeah, I think this is another way in which this movie kind of embodies some really classic like American independent film tropes or just like markers of that kind of, it's not exactly a genre, but like a production approach that almost begins to resemble a genre, is that all of the characters, even when they don't speak very much or have a lot of screen time, are allowed to be like fully human. And so, you know, it's like in some of those scenes, Trina is the like most positive influence. She's the only person hyping up Gia, the only person present for her. And in others, she is like Gia's undercutting undercutting what very thin confidence Gia has. And all of those things can exist in the same person and not be like contradictory or have to be immediately resolved. It's just like that's the nature of life. Yeah. You know?
One narrative device in the movie that I love is that her job, which is she is like a portrait photographer at like a Macy's style, like just like family studio thing. But the narrative device is that it allows kind of these like interstitial moments where the families that are getting their pictures taken reflecting on like motherhood and family. And the really good ones are when there are families that don't have the mother present in the pictures. They're kind of retelling what like their mothers meant to them. And there's several like really good monologues in the moment. But the pink shirt guy was the one that really got me. He's the one that talks about how he was taken from his mom at an early age. And he says, those foster homes put me on a bad path. And to this day, it's a path I still can't run from. And then the part that really got me is he says, and I think that this is like kind of crystallizing what we're going to talk about with like CPS is he says, and to this day, I never blame my mother. Kind of shining a light on the idea that I think the central message of the movie too is the idea that CPS is helping these kids when really taking them from their mothers is almost always a worse solution than whatever you're attempting to protect them from.
Right. And for everyone.
Yeah.
Right. For nearly everyone. Yeah, I agreed that her being a photographer at this little studio offers some really interesting narrative opportunities, because the first time we see her in the photography studio, she is touching a baby. She's positioning a baby on like a column, and so because we know the movie is called Earth Mama, and we haven't fully seen, it's like the background there is clouds, right? It's almost, again, this kind of magical realist moment where you're like, oh, she is like tending to a baby in this kind of fantastical space, and then it zooms out and you're like, oh, she is a worker and facilitating photography of a baby for a mom and dad that are just off screen and then step forward. And I think that really encapsulates everything that's going on in this movie, right? Like where there is this like idyllic vision of motherhood that is just always being spoiled by what's just off camera.
Yeah. And to that end, there's that one shot that's really good where there is that magical realism element where she's imagining she's walking through the woods, and then it cuts and zooms out and she's in the portrait studio in front of like a woodsy backdrop that she's like pulling the chain to remove, which I thought was a really cool moment. But yeah, do we want to talk about Child Protective Services and the costs on mothers of being entangled with the state?
Yeah.
Now seem like a good time. So the American system that is Child Protective Services is a tool of the state meant to protect children from conditions beyond their control, and has for too long been used as a tool to police minority communities, usually for the offense of being poor. The modern version of America's Child Protective Services can be traced back to the 70s. After a series of studies on child abuse and child endangerment, Congress passed the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, in 1974. Among other things, CAPTA introduced mandatory reporting laws for doctors, teachers, and anyone in a position of monitoring the well-being of a child. While CAPTA's original purpose was to identify and stop suspected child abuse, in the years since its passing, it has also served as a way for the state to, again, police and monitor low-income and Black Americans. According to a story by Mother Jones, which is where I got a lot of information here, in the United States, at least 84% of children entering foster care are going in for reasons other than abuse. And substandard housing is cited as a reason in 9% of removals into foster care, according to data from 2021.
And I want to say, this is not in our script, but I just want to add in, and not all of our listeners are in Florida, but if you live in Florida, you may not know that there is a CAPTA equivalent law that applies to literally every single adult.
Yeah.
Not just
mandatory
reporters that we think of, like doctors, teachers, the other categories that Craig listed. So just wanted to insert that in here. And while CAPTA and mandatory reporting laws are important in identifying and stopping child abuse, it's really clear that in the 50 years since its passing, that CAPTA frequently acts as a legal buffer to allow the state to control low income and minority families. We have to conceive of it as part of the criminal legal system, right? Like the war on drugs and the prison industrial system were born from America's desire to control Black folks after slavery and segregation, right? Just in line with all the stuff I talked about before we led into the movie. Child Protective Services has become just another tool for policing Black families in the United States.
And also in that Mother Jones article, there is a section about a guy named Alan Detlaff, who was once a CPS caseworker, who now works as an advocate against the work that he once did. And I just want to quickly read an excerpt from that article about Detlaff and his experience as a CPS worker. Detlaff believes that most, if not all, of the children removed from their homes could have stayed with their families, and that racial bias plays a huge role in family separation. And these are not all CPS cases. He's referring to the ones in which he worked when he worked there. When investigating families in a neighborhood in East Fort Worth, which was predominantly Black and low income, he and his colleagues always brought a car seat with them. They believe, based on no information other than the neighborhood, that they'd be leaving with somebody's baby. He thinks of a Black child named Charles, who was around 9. The decision was made to remove him from his family because of the child's misbehavior, even though Detlaff couldn't confirm he was being abused. We brought the police with us. Charles's mother and grandmother were at the house, and they knew immediately why we were there. The mother said, "Run, Charles, run. They're going to take you away and sell you to the white people." Charles was running, frantically trying to put clothes in a backpack. The grandmother was saying, "Please don't sell him down the river. Don't sell him down the river." Detlaff didn't know what that expression meant at the time. To later understand how deeply connected the family separations are to slavery is still traumatizing for me to think about, he says. That's the kind of horror and trauma that's inflicted on families without any recognition of historical context and the trauma that remains because of that historical context.
And I also just want to insert here that a lot of times foster families are given some kind of stipend to care for the children that have been taken away from their families of origin. Like we hear that referred to in this movie when Miss Carmen, the caseworker, talks about Gia missing child support payments. Like the child support payments in this instance is being paid to a foster family to take care of the children. Also, usually the state is supplementing that in some way. And that oftentimes, as included in, some of what I talked about here, oftentimes when children are removed from the house and the issue is not physical or mental abuse, it's about economic deprivation.
Yeah.
So the state is taking children away from impoverished families, giving them to other people, and then instead of applying social welfare benefits to the original families and emphasizing family unification, they give that money to somebody else. So a holistic view of the damage that can be wrought by Child Protective Services is, often overwhelming, and the families that are destroyed become like a depressing statistic, if that's not part of your direct experience, your community. Earth Mama gives an intimate, unflinching picture of what state-sanctioned family separation looks like. And it does so by not just displaying like the humanity, which frankly is self-evident, of the characters, but by like really bringing you into Gia's emotional world. So, Craig.
Yes.
What does Gia decide to do with her current pregnancy in this movie?
Well, I mean, that becomes kind of the crux of the second half, is that she finally becomes more open to the idea of adoption, understanding both that might happen anyways, outside of her control. So if she can have some say in it, well, she might as well. But also economically, for herself, can she afford another child? So her and Miss C, I forgot the character's name, but she calls her Miss C, Carmen. They start talking about adoption, and we see first a really good scene where they're flipping through like pictures of prospective families, and she asks if all the families are white, which I think is kind of on the back burner, but I think that is another thing that we probably frequently see, is that when minority children are in the adoption process, they end up going to white families, which to Gia seems like another. It's very obvious that whatever adoption process that Gia goes with, she wants to be a part of the child's life. She wants to have that connection with the child, and clearly sending them to a white family is going to be another element of removal of herself from the child's life. And I thought that was like a very brief moment, but I think a pretty nice touch on it.
I think it's also interesting because even though like white supremacy looms large in this movie, there are not very many white people, right. Because of hyper segregation and how that shapes people's daily lives in America. And so it's like an interesting thing because it's like a place where like whiteness explicitly rears its head, as opposed to being like the backdrop of the rest of the movie.
There is one at least one white person in there that I believe comes back twice in like almost unspoken moments that I thought were really funny.
Another pregnant woman
who we first see at one of the meetings.
Alexis, I think is her name.
Yeah, and we don't really hear what she has to say. We just hear Trina at the end being like, these white women always go on for too long, or whatever she says about it. But then later on, we see she has a very like upsetting moment at a hospital, and when she's like kind of running out in tears, the camera lingers on a white woman who's pregnant and is smiling, like clearly having a very different experience. And I believe that's the same girl.
It is, and I think what's implied is that she's also undergoing the adoption process.
But her experience is completely seeming in that like quick moment, completely polar opposite to Gia's. And then I think, although you can't quite tell because she's so outside of the like shot, but when Gia and Trina get in that fight at like the burnout party or whatever, I think Trina is now hanging out with the white girl who's like just behind her in the shot. I couldn't tell because she like half of her face fades in and out of the shot. She's like very clearly not in it, but I think it's the same woman.
Haziness, there's a lot of like soft focus background, but so you want to continue, what how does the adoption journey proceed?
So she picks this family, which is a husband and wife and their like 17-year-old daughter, who we learn that they had a daughter and then were never able to have kids again, so they're gonna give them up for adoption. And I got super geeked because fucking Bokeem Woodbine is in this scene.
I know, for like he's in the movie for probably 3 minutes cumulatively, but he's the father in the family.
I love him. He's been in a ton of shit. He first came to my attention in that one season of Fargo, if you watch Fargo, where he's like menacing as shit but also like really charming. And also he's in the Halo show.
Oh,
like
wow.
I think he's like
full circle.
He's a dude in the Halo show. He's a guy that like, because in Halo, like the Master Chief, they're like a race of superhumans that are bred to be soldiers, and he's a dude that escaped and became like a nihilist anarchic weirdo on like on a weird like planet or whatever. But he's great. But they meet in a diner and kind of get to know each other, and there is a really poignant conversation between Gia and the family's older daughter, where we see like their similarities. They both played basketball, and it's very clear to Gia that this is a mirror version of herself if she was given some of the like positions in society that this girl had, in that she has a mother and a father that are, we don't know how affluent, but we get certainly more affluent than she is. And we see like just this very, you know, they don't go in depth and it's not explicit, but it is very much meant to be this kind of mirror version of herself that she's talking to.
Yeah, it's intended to be a foil. I think it's also, this scene really emphasizes that, again, it's about the matrix of oppression, like the intersection of race and class. Certainly, I am in no way underestimating the ways in which class does not save, like, for example, middle class and wealthy Black women from maternal mortality rates. But we see the ways in which class is operating here, because we hear about how Monica, which is the mother's name, is able to like engage her fertility on her own terms.
Right.
Now, like, again, we hear that it sounds like she experienced some miscarriages, identified that she's not able to get pregnant again, but even when she's telling that story, she leads in with, oh, we had Amber, which is the name of the daughter, and then we decided to wait. You know, we decided to wait.
Yeah.
You know, it's about choice and autonomy over her reproductive journey and seeking options to expand their family at the time and in the way that they want. Whereas like Gia has so little autonomy in dictating what happens to her and her reproductive capacities.
One movie that came to mind while I was watching this is a movie I do not like at all. But it's similar, but it did just it just got me down an interesting thought process of how the two movies compare similar topics. But that is Juno, the idea of like a young person having to deal with like, what do I do with this child that I'm going to have? And I think I don't know, maybe crystallize why I don't like Juno that much is that Juno's very like glib and whimsical about a decision that should have a little bit more gravity and weight to it, even if like you are making a comedy. You know, like the shit in Juno with like just everything about the movie I don't like. But like, I don't know, this movie, I just kept thinking about the differences and like how stark they are, that yeah, when you make it about a young white affluent girl, like you can afford to make it glib and whimsy, and then when you see the kind of more realistic, truer version of this story, it just stands in stark contrast to the version in Juno. I don't know. Is this a stretch, or am I?
I mean, well, I don't know. I was thinking, because it's like,
finding a reason to bring up Juno and why I hate it.
I do think that there are interesting parallels, right? I do think that some of what's going on in Juno, which absolutely is also race, but is like, it's so tied to a very specific period of time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Where like tweeness was just like out of fucking control. Because if you think about something like, do you like Young Adult? Like, have you seen Young Adult?
Yeah,
Young Adult is great.
Yeah.
And is also written by Diablo Cody, and also is about not a super young woman, but a young woman wrestling with her fertility, her relationship, right? It confronts weighty topics and has that kind of pitter patter sense of humor, but isn't quite so just
annoying,
over the top twee.
Yeah.
And so I think like it's hard to kind of imagine like, what if Juno was not the first script of hers that was made into a big movie, and what if it was like, what if she took that nugget and had written it like, what if like that and Young Adult were flipped in terms of
when
in her career,
right?
Like maybe Juno would have had some of the moral clarity of this movie, or at least be a little bit more dynamic, because there's a lot of things in Juno that are really weird. Like the way it handles, and or which is to say it does not, handles abortion is very odd. The way it
does kind of like, while trying to make anti-abortionists seem crazy, it does kind of make it seem like abortion's not a really good choice. Don't do that.
Right, which is fine.
Yeah.
You can have a character not make that election, but not
presenting it in a way where like
also those motherfuckers are screaming at people. It's not a joke. Which is not to say you can't make a joke about it. I'm not like some hard ass who has no sense of humor.
Movie, it's just it's like
a little Asian girl who's saying, like, you shouldn't do that to your baby,
saying in a kind of fucked up
accent.
All babies deserve to get born.
Yeah,
is what she says.
Whereas like I have family members that escort on a weekly basis at abortion clinics, and they're getting like screamed at for hours and hours and hours, and that's not even obviously the people who are trying to like procure a fucking medical procedure. So that's weird. And then like also all the stuff with Jason Bates and the obvious like underage inappropriate relationship. I just think the movie it elects not to wrestle with very complex themes in exchange for being twee.
Right.
So it's hard because no one in that movie is a human being, right? Whereas like this movie is very deeply about fundamentally human characters.
Also in Earth Mama, Rainn Wilson never says that's
undiddle that doodle
can't be
or undiddle undiddle that doodle. I will be real, I say that. I don't say the home skillet part, but I do say the undiddle that doodle does stick in my head.
Yeah,
so
but whenever I've
been cursed forever by Diablo Cody.
That line inverts my spine. I hate it so much. I will say, like, I think I like most everything else that Diablo Cody has done.
Have you seen Lisa Frankenstein?
Nope. Didn't even know about it. So there we go.
Oh, okay.
I already shot this. Yeah. I was thinking I like Young Adult. I like Jennifer's Body. I like Tully.
Tully is good.
So I wonder. I would be interested. I wonder if she has talked about this. I wonder how she thinks, what she thinks about Juno this far removed from it.
If I had to just fucking shot in the dark bullshit, and it's our podcast, so I'm gonna do that. I feel like it has something to do with branding, basically. Like that's not quite the word I mean, but like, you know, if you are trying to like stake your ground, doing so, like, it makes sense that your script that is the most punched up, the most distinctive, the most idiosyncratic is what's going to be globbed onto. And again, doing so in this time period where, like, I don't know, fellow white people are like unable to not be super saccharine
about everything.
That maybe that's what was going on there.
Yeah, it's also the movie that smacks the most of like a young, talented, creative person that somebody gave a copy of like Story by Robert McKee or how to save the cat, or like one of those really annoying like, every movie is just one version of 5 different kinds of movies. You just got to fill in the gaps or whatever. Like Juno always smacked of like that kind of like approach to script writing or whatever.
Yeah, it definitely does not feel lived in. In the way that something like Earth Mama does. And now I feel like it's a great time to talk about the body horror.
The grossest part of the movie. Like, literally, I love disgusting stuff, but there was one part in this movie where I was like, oh, I can't watch this anymore because I am on the verge of throwing up.
It was it was a little bit of a left turn. So in Earth Mama, there is a ongoing visual metaphor of the umbilical cord as being like a physical connection to your children. We see this very early on, kind of the first instance of body horror. We see Gia's pregnant belly, and it appears that she has, like, how, if you've ever seen like a newborn baby where their umbilical cord is like kind of, it's got the clamp, and it's like the little bit that's been cut off is like shriveled. We see that her big pregnant belly has that, and it's like just for maybe 10 seconds. It's like very brief. We see that there's a reference on a like a TV show or a documentary or something talking about cutting the umbilical cord on babies, and then there is a more prolonged scene.
There's a few other ones too, like right after, like when she's having one of the visions. I don't think it's when she has the baby, but she's like dreaming of having the baby or something. But she's like very lovingly, like, the umbilical cord is just
wrapped around
her, and she's kind of like lovingly like stroking it and holding it, but then
But then we get a full body horror scene
Oh my God.
where she is standing nude in a bathroom in front of a mirror, and we see like a bit of that like kind of shriveled, darker, like, you know, like the like blood either is or has been flowing through it, in the umbilical cord, kind of sticking out of her belly button, and then she pulls it and proceeds to continue to pull it as if there is like a rope of umbilical cord
God,
that
so
she
gross.
is continually summoning from her belly, and it I thought was extremely effective, because not only is the metaphor obviously deeply relevant, but it's really a shocking moment that is kind of jolted me relative to all of this other kind of fantastical imagery. Is all about like comfort, and it's her escapism and her emotional regulation tool, right? Like she imagines herself in the redwoods and it helps calm her so she can focus on the task at hand, what she needs to do in order to get her kids back, etc. And this was just like starts that way and then takes a sharp left turn. What was your reaction?
I was grossed out, but I also thought it was very powerful. I think one of the big themes is that cycle of like motherhood, and like obviously the idea of her seeing her own umbilical cord, meaning that she's reflecting on some attachment she has to her mother. And then when she starts pulling it is kind of one of her lowest moments. And it seems like a visual metaphor of like trying to physically break that like connection, that cycle or whatever. And just its unending horror, basically, because we never see her fully pull it out of her stomach. Like the scene just cuts away with her with like a fucking 2 yards of umbilical cord pulled out of her gut. Yeah, it's very striking. It's gross, but like really beautifully shot. And yeah.
Yeah, and if Savanah Leaf, the director, hadn't set up so effectively prior to that scene that there were going to be these interceding elements, it would be like a really truly out of left field.
Yeah.
And it's not, but the imagery is so distinct and disgusting that
it's shocking, but it's
effective.
Not, it's not cheap, I guess.
Yeah. It feels clearly integrated into the storytelling that she's been crafting.
So as it gets close to the end, we see like all this weight, more and more weight piling up on Gia's shoulders, and then she kind of has a final moment where she breaks with Trina. Like they have basically just shy of like coming to blows at this party. And she goes home, and we see that she smokes crack, and it sends her into the most like explicit version of this magical realism forest world where she's completely naked, just kind of like slowly walking through the forest. And it also induces labor in her, and her water breaks, and she goes to the hospital. Well, first off, I don't want to jump the gun, but did you have anything you wanted to add about that scene where she's in the woods, and specifically her kind of relapse?
Well, 2 things. One, I'll say I think it's really effective that her recovery is seeded throughout the movie. Let's contrast this against Traffic.
Yep.
Right? The way this movie depicts someone who is on a recovery journey is so subtle and real and lived in contrast to like, I'm fucking smoking crack in the bando on the corner, right, like Traffic is doing.
And so often, like, I feel like relapse stories, or how they're depicted in movies, are depictions of like selfish debauchery, whereas this one is very much like, how the fuck do I keep living in this world without some form of something to give me a break from unending like shit?
And this movie is definitely very well versed in kind of a therapizing language. And like, that's why I've been talking about emotional regulation. Like there are a lot of dominant theories on substance abuse that conceive of substance abuse as being about essentially broken emotional regulation, right? And that in substance use is maladaptive in that it hurts us, but it is a tool in the toolkit of emotional regulation when either you don't have access to other tools, or you've experienced trauma that has disrupted those other tools, right? And I think this scene is really impactful because, again, her going into nature or having these magical realist moments is part of her emotional regulation toolkit. That is obviously how she is like coping, is by imagining being in these spaces. And so I think it's really powerful that when she does smoke, she is doing so in that setting because it ties those things together. She has been relying on these other coping mechanisms and she's at a breaking point, and now this is entering that emotional regulation space with her again. So I thought that was like really, really beautifully done. The other thing,
shot in a very non-judgmental way. Like, it doesn't linger. Like, you almost don't even see what she's smoking.
Yeah,
the camera pans and you get a very quick glimpse.
It shows
of,
like the pipe.
It
shows the pipe, but it doesn't show her smoking directly.
Yeah.
The other thing here, and we haven't brought this up, but it's very potent in this scene in particular, though it's present throughout the movie, is the score. In this movie is fucking great. It's slow and jazzy, and in this scene there's it's not all the time in the score, but some of the score has a really beautiful saxophone that kind of feels like it's floating through, and that again resurges here. So we then go from that scene to immediately cut to she's having a C-section performed, and that we hear the doctors say that there's an abruption and a loss of 2 liters of blood. Like, it's clear things are not in a good place.
Right, yeah.
I will also note that in this scene, some of the things in this scene that are most impactful are not spoken or are more subtle. So one of the things about a C-section is that you have to be awake during it. Now that's obviously can be horrifying for a lot of different reasons. But one of the benefits of it is that the doctors and nurses can talk to you. No one ever fucking talks to her in this scene.
The sound is gross. Like, you hear all the surgery noise. You never see it. Like, you see her face in the curtain. So everything that's happening on the other side of the curtain, but you hear it and you see her just like in pain.
Right.
And no one kind of cold to her.
And no one says that to her. They show her that the baby has been removed from her uterus, but they don't hand the baby to her, and the baby is whisked away. It's definitely a hyperclinical, again, you feel the presence of the state lurking, and it's a sharp contrast to the idyllic, hazy, soft world of the forest that she's been, ripped from. Yeah.
And then we see that basically her hand is forced now because they have done a test. It either has already or they know is going to come up positive for drug use. So she has kind of a very emotional conversation with Miss C, who tells her, you've got about an hour to decide before they decide for you. Because at this point, she's decided that she actually doesn't want to give the baby up for adoption, and now realizes, well, if I don't do that, the child's going to go into foster care. I'm not going to have any say. So she does decide to go with the original family, Bokeem Woodbine and his family. And there's like a very tender moment of them coming in and meeting them. And it is a really sad moment. And I think magnified by the fact that it is best case scenario. Like, this horrible moment of her giving her child away to this family is for her the best case scenario in that moment. Like, this is the best option she could go with, which is just a very like melancholy kind of sad ending to her story. I mean, there is like an element of hope, but I don't know. I was just struck by that like
I think it is intended to be pretty
sad.
I think it's intended to be melancholic, especially in the way that it's shot, where after Gia hands the baby over to Monica, because of the way the family is arranged, Monica, who's the mother in the family, immediately, like, her back is turned to Gia. So Gia's like lying in the hospital bed, and Monica's back is to Gia while holding the baby and facing her husband and Amber, their daughter. And so it's like Gia's world has immediately been, their worlds have been immediately separated, essentially. And I do think there is, like, you know, that touching conversation then, because Amber sits down next to Gia and Gia asks her to protect her,
really nice.
The baby that will be her younger sister, or is her
and
younger
says
sister.
she needs way more protection than I ever got, or something like that.
And it's again like wrestling with these kind of ideas of like intergenerational trauma and cycles, but just the idea that is always in the backdrop is that the system has totally failed Gia the opportunity to be the person to break them, to break the cycle, rather than, essentially having to like find an exemption through a family that has a better class position than her own.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I like this movie a lot. There was a little bit of a postscript that I'm now blanking on what happened at the end.
Yeah, there's, we see Gia in court. Mel takes her to court, and we see that Gia's dressed up in a suit and that her like nipples are leaking milk through her shirt. So again, that, the reminder of her pregnancy stays close. It's not far. And Miss Carmen testifies as to Gia's progress, and Gia makes a statement about wanting more and longer visits with her children. I thought that was powerful because I think the implication, or how we're meant to interpret, is that she hasn't done that before. Like, right. I think this is supposed to be like an evolution of her speaking
for herself, and
and standing up for what she wants and what she knows that her family needs.
And what I thought was really interesting is not particularly like eloquent or well spoken, because it's written in her voice, this character who's never done that before, but it is like a powerful speech, like the way the camera is framed on her, like looking up, and kind of that long take where she gets to deliver it all at once. It's definitely like signifying like this is her a new like step in the evolution of like who she's going to become. So there is like that hopeful tone to it a little bit.
And there's also like so much of Gia's relationship with her children is constantly overwritten by the state, the caseworkers, the social workers, the people who are running the all the classes that she has to go to. It's circumscribed by her boss, by her sister who controls where she lives, all of this. And it's like, this is her getting to speak for herself in a much more like forceful and straightforward way than we see in the rest of the movie. And then after she has finished speaking, we get voiceover from another woman in the class talking about, essentially like what motherhood and family means to her. And then it cuts to Gia by the water. And then, the credits roll on top of that image.
Is a hopeful ending, because it was like where the place that she said she wanted to take her kid again. So like the idea that she either is there with them or plans to be soon. I don't know, maybe I was reading too much into that, but
no, I think it is. And I think there's also something about if we think of like CPS and all of its requirements, that it's really about control, that something about being in nature is about letting go of control or not being within their dominion. And so I do think that that's hopeful, both in terms of like the very concrete, her talking about wanting to go there with her son Trey, but also just like, what does it mean to be untamed, undominated.
Well, do we have anything else to add to Earth Mama? Almost said Mama Earth again. Can't stop myself.
I don't think so. I would definitely encourage people to see this. I thought it was really wonderfully made. It's like an hour 40. It's not super duper long. It's definitely worth it, especially if you've got Paramount Plus or Showtime. It's worth diving in.
Hell yeah. Well, we will not reveal the next one because we're trying to do an episode with some special guests that may or may not happen next. So we will hold on to it, but potentially a fun episode with some fun guests.
Bye-bye.
We'll get you on the next one.
Kill the bullet.